Okay, so this is the first book that I'm going to be reading in a series of books that I will be reading centered around really Christianity, symbolism, and the Logos. I read through this book. I've read it a couple times. It's very short. It's the Saint Gregory of Nyssa's The Life of Moses, which comes in two parts. The first part is the historical explication of the kind of major points of the story of Moses. And the second part, the second book too, is a contemplation of the story of Moses and how it can be reflected and expressed in our individual lives, which I found really interesting and fascinating as I was reading through it. So some of the topics that are in book 2, to give you an idea. So it starts out with birth and childhood. Then it goes through the burning bush, the meeting with Aaron, their deliverance announced, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart and free will, the death of the firstborn, the departure from Egypt, the wealth of Egypt, the cloudy pillar crossing the Red Sea, the first stations in the desert, the manna, the war with Amalek, the mountain of divine knowledge, the darkness, the heavenly tabernacle, the earthly tabernacle, the priestly vestments, the table of stone, eternal progress, Moses envied, and so forth. So the book is broken up into like two books, like I said, two parts. Part 2 has these subsects that are maybe 2-3 pages each. So I'm starting with this one first because I found the book really helpful and interesting, and it's easy to kind of read through a section and either comment or it's fitting for YouTube videos here. So I'm going to start here with book 2. Book 2, the Contemplation on the Life of Moses. So birth and childhood. Remember, this is speaking to and reflecting on the spiritual insights of the story of Moses from start to end. So birth and childhood. Moses was born at the time Pharaoh issued the decree for male offspring to be destroyed. How should we, as a matter of choice, imitate this fortuitous birth of Moses? Someone will rightly raise the objection that it does not lie within our power to imitate in our own birth that famous birth. But it is not hard to begin the imitation with this seeming difficulty. Everyone knows that anything placed in a world of change never remains the same, but is always passing from one state to another, the alteration always bringing about something better or worse. The narrative is to be understood according to its real intention, for the material and passionate disposition to which human nature is carried when it falls is the female form of life, whose birth is favored by the tyrant. The austerity and intensity of virtue is the male birth, which is hostile to the tyrant and suspected of insurrection against his rule. Now, it is certainly required that what is subject to change can be, in a sense, always coming to birth. In mutable nature, nothing can be observed that is always the same. Being born, in the sense of constantly experiencing change, does not come about as the result of external initiative, as is the case with the birth of the body, which takes place by chance. Such a birth occurs by choice. We are in some manner our own parents, giving birth to ourselves by our own free choice in accordance with whatever we wish to be, whether male or female, molding ourselves to the teaching of virtue and vice. We can most certainly enter upon a better birth into the realm of light, however much the unwilling tyrant is distressed, and we can be seen with pleasure and be given life by the parents of this goodly offspring, even though it is contrary to the design of the tyrant. The rational faculties are what become the parents of virtue. When we lay bare the hidden meaning of the story, Scripture is seen to teach that the birth which distresses the tyrant is the beginning of the virtuous life. I'm speaking of that kind of birth in which free will serves as the midwife, delivering the child amid great pain. For no one causes grief to his antagonist unless he exhibits in himself those marks which give proof of his victory over the other. It is the function of the free will to beget this virtuous male offspring, to nourish it with proper food, and to take forethought how to save it unharmed from the water. For there are those who present their children to the tyrant, delivering them naked and without forethought to the stream. I am speaking of life as a stream made turbulent by the successive waves of passion, which plunge what is in the stream under the water and drown it. Whenever life demands that the sober and providential rational thoughts, which are the parents of the male child, launch their good child on the billows of this life, they make him safe in an ark, so that when he is given to the storm, he will not be drowned. The ark, constructed out of various boards, would be education in the different disciplines, which holds what it carries above the waves of life. Although he is borne along by the rushing of the waves, the child is not carried far by tossing of the waters where there is education. Instead, he is washed to the side, and the motion of the waters naturally thrust him on the firm bank, that is to say, outside the turmoil of life. Experience teaches us that the restless and heaving motion of life thrusts us from itself those who do not totally submerge themselves in the deceits of human affairs. And it reckons us as a useless burden those whose virtue is annoying. He who escapes from these things must imitate Moses and not spare his tears, even though he should be safe in the ark, for tears are the unfailing guardian of those saved by virtue. Since the daughter of the king, being childless and barren, I think she is rightly perceived as profane philosophy, arranged to be called his mother by adopting the youngster, Scripture concedes that his relationship with her, who was falsely called his mother, should not be rejected until he had recognized his own immaturity. But he who has already attained maturity, as we have learned about Moses, will be ashamed to be called the son of one who is barren by nature. For truly barren is profane education, which is always in labor but never gives birth. For what fruit worthy of such pangs does philosophy show for being so long a labor? Do not all who are full of wind and never come to term miscarry before they come to the light of the knowledge of God? Although they could as well become men if they were not altogether hidden in the womb of barren wisdom. Now, after living with the princess of the Egyptians for such a long time that he seemed to share in their honors, he must return to his natural mother. Indeed, he was not separated from her while he was being brought up by the princess, but was nursed by his mother's milk, as the history states. This teaches, it seems to me, that if we should be involved with profane teaching during our education, we should not separate ourselves from the nourishment of the church's milk, which would be her laws and her customs. But these the soul is nourished and matured. By these the soul is nourished and matured, thus being given the means of ascending the height. It is true that he who looks both to the profane doctrines and to the doctrines of the fathers will find himself between two antagonists. For the foreigner in worship is opposed to the Hebrew teaching and contentiously strives to appear stronger than the Israelite. And so he seems to be many of the more superficial who abandon the faith of their fathers and fight on the side of the enemy, becoming transgressors of the fathers' teaching. On the other hand, he who is great and noble in soul, like Moses, slays his own hand, the one who rises up in opposition to true religion. One may, moreover, find this same conflict in us, for man is set before competitors as the prize of their contest. He makes the one with whom he sides the victor over the other. The fight of the Egyptian against the Hebrew is like the fight of idolatry against true religion, of licentiousness against self-control, of injustice against righteousness, of arrogance against humility, and of everything against what is perceived by its opposite. Moses teaches us by his own example to take our stand with virtue as with the kinsman and to kill virtue's adversary. The victory of true religion is the death and destruction of idolatry. See also, injustice is killed by righteousness, and arrogance is slain by humility. The dispute of the two Israelites with each other occurs also in us. There would be no occasion for wicked, heretical opinions to arise unless erroneous reasonings withstood the truth. If, therefore, we by ourselves are too weak to give the victory to what is righteous, since the bad is stronger in its attacks and rejects the rule of truth, we must flee as quickly as possible, in accordance with the historical example, from the conflict to the greater and higher teachings of the mysteries. And if we must again live with a foreigner, that is to say, if need requires us to associate with profane wisdom, let us with determination scatter the wicked shepherds from their unjust use of the wells, which means let us reprove the teachers of evil for their wickedness use of instruction. In the same way, we shall live a solitary life, no longer entangled with adversaries or mediating between them, but we shall live among those of like disposition and mind who are fed by us, while all the movements of our soul are shepherded like sheep by the will of guiding reason. So that is the first section that talks about the birth of Moses and a reflection on how we can understand that in terms of our lives in the present day. Next portion here is the burning bush, which I will get into next go around. So thanks for listening.